The night my mother-in-law's anniversary dinner turned into the most talked-about evening in Hartford County, I was 8 months pregnant, wearing borrowed pearls and carrying a $400,000 sapphire in my evening bag. Nobody knew about the sapphire. That was the point. 40 guests had gathered at the Whitmore estate that Saturday.
May everything
Crystal
you deserve
chandeliers,
come true.
white tablecloths, the kind of dinner where old money performs itself for other old money, and everyone pretends the performance is completely natural. My husband's mistress was seated 6 chairs away from me. She was wearing my ring, not a ring like mine, not a similar ring, my ring, the Whitmore sapphire, 4 generations, Victorian setting, worth more than most people's houses, promised to me publicly at my wedding in front of 108 witnesses by a woman who was already planning to take it back. She held her hand up every time she reached for her wine glass. She thought she had won. She had been planning this for 14 months. I had been planning for 6 days. What happened in the next 40 minutes ended a marriage, exposed a conspiracy that went back 30 years, and made a gemologist named Dorothy the most popular woman in the room. This is not a story about revenge. This is a story about what happens when the people who were supposed to protect you become the threat, and you decide, finally, that you are not going to go quietly. This is a story about the difference between patience and weakness. And the first lesson begins not at the dinner table, but 6 days earlier, on a Tuesday night, on a bathroom floor, with a phone in my shaking hands and a baby kicking against my ribs like she already knew. Stay with me. Value statement. Before we begin, if you have ever been the last person in the room to know the truth about your own life, this story is for you. If someone has ever mistaken your trust for permission, stay with me. Because what Claire Whitmore did that Saturday night is not just satisfying to witness, it is a masterclass in what to do when the ground disappears beneath you and you discover, to your own surprise, that you can still stand. The first lesson: when you discover a betrayal, your most powerful move is to do nothing visible. Do not confront. Do not cry in front of them. Do not change your behavior by a single degree. Information is only a weapon, while the other side does not know you have it. The moment you show your hand, the window closes forever. Claire understood this instinctively. It saved everything that mattered.
Claire Whitmore was 33 years old, 8 months pregnant, and approximately 48 hours away from discovering that her entire marriage had been a performance staged for an audience she was never meant to join. She did not know this on the Tuesday night when she sat in her kitchen eating leftover pasta and watching her husband scroll through his phone with the casual ease of a man who had nothing to hide. She did not know it when she kissed him goodnight and told him the baby had been especially active that afternoon. She did not know it when she lay in the dark and felt her daughter turn slowly inside her, a lazy roll from one side to the other, running out of room. She found out at 11:52 p.m. when she picked up his phone to search for a contractor's number. They were finalizing the nursery built-in. The contractor had sent revised measurements earlier that day, and Claire, who ran her own interior design firm and had strong opinions about millwork, wanted to confirm the specifications before she forgot. Richard's phone was closer. She picked it up without thinking. It buzzed in her hand. A notification. A name she did not recognize. B. Office. She told herself not to open it. Her thumb disagreed. Not a text. A photograph. A woman's hand against white hotel sheets. Dark red nail polish. Slender fingers arranged with the deliberate carelessness of someone who wanted the image to look casual and had worked at it. And on the ring finger, catching every bit of light in the frame, with the particular brilliance of a stone that had been worn and loved for generations. The Whitmore sapphire. Claire's throat closed. The baby kicked once, hard against her lowest rib, a warning she had received approximately 14 months too late. She knew that ring the way she knew her own heartbeat. She had studied it on her wedding day, held in Eleanor's hands, glowing under the chapel light, Burmese, unheated, late Victorian setting. Eleanor had pressed Claire's fingers around the box and said, in front of everyone, "I am saving this for you. After you give this family the gift it has been waiting for." And she had smiled at Claire's stomach with a precision that Claire had interpreted, at the time, as warmth. The shower was running. Richard was in the master bathroom, humming something she did not recognize. She would later find out it was a country song she had never heard. She developed a strong and lasting opinion about country music after that. Claire set the phone down, exactly where she had found it, face down, same angle. Her hands were not shaking. She found that strange. She had expected shaking. The bathroom door opened. Steam rolled out. Richard emerged with a towel around his waist, wet hair, the easy smile of a man returning from somewhere uncomplicated. "Hey," he said. "You still up? You okay?" "Just tired," she said. "The baby has been active today." He crossed to her side, pressed a kiss to her forehead. The same kiss he had given her every morning for 6 years. It landed differently now, like hearing a familiar song played in the wrong key. "Get some rest," he said. "I'll turn the light off." She nodded. Watched him settle, waited until his breathing slowed and deepened into sleep. Then she lay in the dark and made a list. She did not cry. Not yet. Crying was for later, when she could afford the distraction. Right now there was only the cold, clear weight of what she had seen and the list growing quietly in her mind, and the baby turning inside her like she was already practicing for a world that was going to require more from both of them than either of them had planned. In the morning, Richard left early for a client meeting. Claire waited 20 minutes. Then she called her best friend. Josie Brennan arrived in 40 minutes, in her Navy court blazer, with 2 coffees and the focused expression she normally reserved for depositions. She took one look at Claire's face, set the coffees on the counter, and said, "Tell me everything." Claire told her the phone, the photograph, the ring. Josie did not interrupt. When Claire finished, she opened her laptop, typed a name, and said, "Do you know who she is?" Claire shook her head. "Give me the name from his phone." "B, office," Claire said. "I don't have a low last name." Josie looked at her steadily. Then she picked up her phone and called her husband. Matthew Webb had been doing forensic accounting for divorce cases for 11 years. He was methodical, quiet, and possessed of a specific gift for finding money that people believed they had hidden successfully. He called back in 4 hours. What he had found made Claire sit down and not get up for a long time. A second bank account opened 15 months ago. $81,000 moved from their joint savings in increments carefully designed to avoid attention. An apartment in downtown Hartford, lease signed 13 months ago. 12 days after Claire had sat in an exam room and heard her daughter's heartbeat for the first time and watched her husband cry with what she had believed completely was joy, and a position created at Richard's law firm, client relations coordinator, a role with no predecessor and no job description, paying $54,000 a year, filled by a woman named Ashley Morgan, 27 years old, formerly a hostess at the private club Richard had belonged to for 6 years. The affair had not begun at work. Richard had met Ashley at the club, then billed her a salary, then begun dismantling, quietly and systematically, the life he shared with his wife. And then Claire had gotten pregnant, and the timeline had accelerated. The apartment lease was signed on a Thursday, Josie said quietly. 12 days after your first trimester announcement. Claire looked at the date on the document, said nothing. "I'm sorry," Josie said. "Don't be," Claire said. "Just keep going." She touched her stomach. Her daughter shifted, slow and deliberate, pressing outward against Claire's palm as if checking whether she was still there. "I'm here," Claire thought, "and I am not going anywhere." The worst piece of information did not come from Matthew's financial documents. It came from Josie's phone at 9:30 that evening in the form of a forwarded email from a woman named Patricia who handled event planning for the Whitmore Family Foundation. Patricia had been Josie's client 2 years earlier. She owed Josie a significant professional debt and had apparently decided this was the moment to begin repaying it. The email contained a guest list. Eleanor Whitmore's anniversary dinner, Saturday evening, the Whitmore estate. 40 guests, black tie. Claire scanned the names, recognized most of them, stopped at one entry near the bottom, listed under family friends. Ashley Morgan. +1, Diane Morgan, mother, relationship to family, future daughter-in-law. She read it 3 times. Future daughter-in-law. She was 8 months pregnant. She had not yet delivered her child. She had not yet been served with divorce papers. She had not yet been told that her marriage was ending. And Eleanor Whitmore had already introduced her son's mistress to their entire social circle with a title. The replacement had not just been planned, it had been scheduled. It had a guest list and a seating arrangement and a dress code. That night, Claire sat alone in the nursery. She had painted it herself in September, working carefully around her growing stomach on a Saturday afternoon while Richard attended what he had described as a client golf event. Sage green walls, because Eleanor had lobbied firmly for pale blue, and Claire had quietly, pleasantly held the line on that one small thing. She had told herself it might be a girl. Eleanor's face had flickered with something when she said it. Claire had interpreted that flicker, at the time, as disappointment about the color. She understood it differently now. She looked at the row of small dresses hanging in the closet. Newborn, 3 months, 6 months. She had bought them over 4 separate shopping trips, stretched across 4 months, because she had wanted to feel the anticipation slowly. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her daughter. "I thought I was building you a family. I was building them a cover story." She let herself cry for exactly 11 minutes. Then she wiped her face, went to the kitchen, and opened a fresh page in her notebook. Because she still had 5 days. And 5 days, she had learned in her years of running a business on a tight timeline, was more than enough time for a person who knew what they were doing. The next morning, she asked Josie to bring Matthew back. They sat at Claire's kitchen table. The same table where she and Richard had shared 6 years of ordinary breakfasts, the same table where she had once planned a surprise anniversary trip to Nantucket that Richard had praised for weeks afterward, and Matthew laid out the complete financial picture. Total funds moved, $81,000. Additionally, a personal loan taken against the house in the amount of $47,000, using documents that bore Claire's signature in handwriting that was not quite right. Forged, Matthew said. He said it simply, the way he said everything. I've compared it to 6 samples of your actual signature. The differences are consistent with copying rather than natural variation. Forged, Claire repeated. Felony fraud, Josie said. Multiple counts. Claire felt something settle in her chest. Not anger exactly. Something colder and more useful. Clarity. And then Josie opened her laptop and read from an email chain that had been forwarded through 2 intermediaries from a Boston attorney who specialized in high-asset custody disputes and had apparently been consulting with Richard for at least 3 months. The strategy was clinical in its precision. Wait until 6 weeks postpartum. Document any observable signs of emotional instability during the recovery period. File for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Seek primary custody of the child on the grounds of the mother's compromised mental state. Specific language recommended: postpartum anxiety, emotional volatility, difficulty bonding. They were going to use Claire's own hormones against her. They were going to wait until she was at her most physically depleted, her most emotionally raw, and then they were going to take her daughter. The room was very quiet for a moment. Outside, a car drove past. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The ordinary sounds of a world continuing without awareness of what was being planned inside this house. "Josie," Claire said finally, "who else knew?" Josie hesitated. Then she said, "I think you need to hear this from someone else first." The knock at the door came 20 minutes later, as if it had been timed. Margaret Whitmore Cole was 60 years old, Richard's older sister, and she was standing on Claire's porch in the October rain with an umbrella in her hand and the expression of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally decided to put it down. "I know," she said. "That is all. I know. Can I come in?" She sat across from Claire at the kitchen table, and she talked for 40 minutes without stopping. And what she said rearranged everything Claire thought she understood about the past 6 years. Eleanor had not simply discovered the affair and tolerated it. Eleanor had arranged it. Ashley Morgan had been a recipient of the Whitmore Family Foundation's Young Women's Scholarship Program. Eleanor's flagship charitable initiative, her most visible legacy, the thing she mentioned at every dinner party. Eleanor had mentored Ashley personally, had introduced her to Richard at a foundation gala 18 months ago with the deliberate intention of providing her son with what she privately referred to as a more suitable partner. Claire had always been, Margaret said quietly, looking at the table rather than at Claire's face, what Mother called capable in ways that would eventually become inconvenient. She said it at a family dinner 2 years ago. She thought I wasn't paying attention. Claire absorbed this. She had been auditioned for replacement before she even knew she was being evaluated. And then Margaret told her about Susan. 30 years ago, a woman who had married Richard's cousin in a ceremony the family had attended with surface warmth and private reservations. When Eleanor decided the marriage was not the right fit for the family's image, the Whitmores had closed ranks with a precision that Margaret described as something between a legal strategy and a military campaign. 19 months later, Susan had lost the marriage, the assets, and primary custody of her young son. She had started over at 33 with nothing that had not been given to her before she married into that family. They had a playbook, Josie said. They had used it before, Matthew confirmed. Claire looked at her hands on the table. Then she looked at Margaret. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come to me now?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because I watched them do it to Susan, and I said nothing. I told myself it was not my place. I told myself she must have done something to deserve it. I was 29 years old, and I was afraid of my mother, and I have spent 30 years being ashamed of that particular combination." She looked at Claire directly. "I am not going to do it again." The meeting with Stephen Whitmore happened on Wednesday afternoon, and Claire almost did not take it. The call came from a number she did not recognize. When she answered, the voice on the other end was Richard's father. Quieter than she remembered, more careful with his words. Like a man who had spent decades choosing them badly and was now attempting a different approach. "I would like to speak with you privately," he said. "Before Saturday. Would you be willing to meet?" Claire held the phone and thought about 40 years of silence, thought about Susan, thought about the way Stephen had smiled at every Whitmore dinner and said nothing and retreated to his study the moment Eleanor began running the room. She thought about the fact that he had called her at all. "Yes," she said. "Tell me where." They met at a coffee shop in West Hartford, 20 minutes from the estate. Neutral ground. Stephen was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with an untouched cup of coffee and a newspaper he had not been reading. He looked smaller than she remembered him. The weight of what he was carrying had compressed him. He did not make her wait. I know what my wife has done, he said. I know what my son has become. I have known for some time, and I did not act, and I am not going to offer you an explanation for that, because there is not one that is adequate. Claire sat across from him, said nothing. Let him talk. I saw Ashley wearing the ring at a foundation luncheon 3 weeks ago. He said this without visible emotion, in the flat tone of a man reporting a fact he has had time to process. I had it quietly appraised by an independent gemologist the following week. What is in Eleanor's safe is synthetic, lab created. Someone invested in a quality imitation, but it is not the Whitmore sapphire. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a velvet box on the table between them. Navy blue, Whitmore crest embossed in gold, the box she had seen on her wedding day. Open it, he said. Her hands were steadier than she expected as she lifted the lid. The Whitmore sapphire sat in its setting and caught the afternoon light coming through the coffee shop window, and it was, without question, the most beautiful thing Claire had seen in 6 days of looking at terrible things. How, she said. I had a duplicate made years ago, Stephen said, as a precaution. I never told Eleanor. I never trusted her relationship with valuable things. The real stone has been in my private safe deposit box for 11 years, he paused. This ring was always meant for you. Eleanor promised it publicly at your wedding, and she meant it as a performance, not a commitment. I am giving it to you now as a commitment. It belongs to your daughter. Whatever happens Saturday, it belongs to your daughter. Claire looked at the ring, looked at the man across from her who had spent 40 years watching his wife destroy things, and had finally, at 68, decided to stop. Why? She said again. He was quiet for a moment. Then, because 30 years ago my wife did to my sister's closest friend what she is now planning to do to you. And I was there, and I was silent, and I have been paying the interest on that silence ever since. He stood, placed money on the table for 2 coffees neither of them had touched. Saturday night, he said, whatever you are planning. I will be there. I will do what needs to be done. Then he walked out into the October afternoon, and Claire sat alone for a long time with the velvet box heavy in her hands. She had gone looking for answers. She had found a weapon. Now she needed Dorothy. Dorothy Aldrich had been authenticating estate jewelry in New England for 23 years and had a specific and well-documented professional distaste for the Whitmore family, whom she had long suspected of quietly circulating enhanced stones through their social network under the description of natural gems. She took approximately 4 seconds to agree to attend Saturday's dinner as Margaret's guest from the Arts Council. I will bring my loupe, she said, in the tone of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this phone call. Claire smiled for the first time in 4 days. By Thursday evening, the plan was complete. Matthew's documents organized into folders, 1 per guest. Josie's settlement papers prepared and ready. Dorothy confirmed. Margaret confirmed. Stephen confirmed. Claire sat in the nursery that night and felt, for the first time since Tuesday, something that resembled the distant outline of hope. She made one mistake. She thought the hard part was over. The lesson here, and it is a lesson worth keeping, when you are dealing with someone who has been running the same play for 40 years, your 5-day plan, however good, is always going to have gaps. The question is not whether they will find one. The question is whether you can recover when they do. Claire could. She just did not know it yet. The first catastrophe arrived on Thursday evening at 8:15 p.m. in the form of a phone call from Patricia, the event planner who had sent the original guest list. Eleanor had been making calls all week. The narrative was already circulating through their social network with the smooth efficiency of something that had been carefully worded before distribution. Claire had been struggling emotionally with the pregnancy She had become difficult to be around. Richard was worried. Eleanor had expressed deep concern to several people, in private, with the particular gravity of a woman sharing a confidence, about whether Claire was really prepared for the demands of new motherhood. By Thursday evening, 6 guests, who had confirmed for Saturday, had quietly canceled with vague excuses. Patricia read Claire the list of names. Claire wrote them down. Looked at the list. She had been friends with 2 of those couples for 4 years. She had attended their children's birthday parties. She had sent casseroles when one of them had surgery. She had not spoken to any of them once in the past week, and Eleanor had already reached them first. She started the unstable story. Before I even knew about the divorce strategy, Claire said. Josie was quiet for a moment on the other end of the phone. Then she said, "She has been doing this for 40 years, Claire. She is very good at it." "I know," Claire said. "It does not change anything." "I know," Claire said again. She hung up and went to bed and did not sleep. The second catastrophe arrived on Friday morning at 6:17 a.m. Matthew's voice on the phone had the specific, careful quality of a person who is managing the delivery of bad news. "He moved the money," Matthew said. "Last night, the joint account." "How much?" Claire said. "All of it," Matthew said. "He left $31. There was a silence. Richard had been tipped off. Not fully. If he knew everything, he would have run. But something had shifted. Something had told him to move fast, and he had moved fast, and now Claire had $31 in the account she had deposited 6 years of design income into, and a daughter who was going to need health insurance and a mortgage payment due in 3 weeks. She stood in her kitchen for a long time. The morning light came through the east window the way it always did. The coffee maker ran through its cycle. Everything looked exactly the same. The baby kicked. "I know," Claire said quietly. "Me too." She called Josie. Josie said, "We knew this was a possibility. The signed documents will cover recovery of all transferred funds. This does not change Saturday." "I know," Claire said. She said "I know" a great deal that morning. It was the only response available. The third catastrophe arrived at 11:47 p.m. A text message from a number Claire did not recognize. She was still awake. Sleep had become theoretical. Sitting in the kitchen, with a glass of water and the nursery monitor on the counter, even though the room was empty, a habit she had developed without noticing, she opened the message. A photograph. Ashley at what appeared to be a bridal salon in downtown Hartford. White dress, champagne glass raised, the synthetic sapphire on her finger catching the salon's ring light. The expression of a woman who believes, completely, that she has won. The caption read, "Cannot wait for tomorrow night," making it official. Claire looked at the number, cross-referenced it against Eleanor's private cell, which Margaret had given her on Wednesday. They matched. Eleanor had sent the photograph to Ashley, celebratory, congratulatory, the matriarch welcoming the replacement before the original had even been formally discarded. Ashley had forwarded it, either by accident or as a taunt, to Claire's number, which Eleanor apparently had saved in her contacts under the notation "R's wife." They were not waiting for the divorce. They were announcing the engagement at tomorrow's dinner. Before Claire had delivered, before she had recovered, before she had a single day to orient herself to whatever came after. Claire set the phone down on the kitchen table. She sat in the quiet for a long time. And then she went to the nursery, and she sat on the floor in the dark, and she cried in the way that happens when you have been holding something enormous for 6 days and your arms give out without warning. Not quiet crying, not controlled crying. The kind that sounds like it is coming from somewhere below language, below thought, from whatever part of a person exists before they learned to manage themselves for an audience. She cried until there was nothing left. Then she sat in the silence afterward. She thought about the velvet box in her bag, the real sapphire, Dorothy with her loop, Matthew's folders, Stephen's voice. Whatever you are planning, I will be there. She thought about her daughter, who would be born into whatever world Claire built for her in the next several months, and who deserved a mother who had gotten up off this floor. She got up. She went back to the kitchen. She looked at her list, and she added 3 more items. Saturday arrived gray and cold, the way October mornings in Connecticut often did when they were trying to tell you something. Margaret appeared at 9 a.m. with a garment bag and the expression of a woman who had decided that if her family was going to be dismantled tonight, it was going to be dismantled with excellent tailoring. I had this altered on Thursday, she said, unzipping the bag. I guessed your measurements. Tell me if I guessed wrong. Inside was a dress in deep navy silk, empire waist, which was both practical and elegant given Claire's current circumstances. Simple lines, the kind of dress that required no additional statement because it was already making one. Claire tried it on, stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom she had shared with Richard for 6 years. She looked exhausted. She looked 8 months pregnant. She looked like a woman who had not slept properly in a week and had been carrying a weight that would have flattened most people. But her eyes were different, sharp and clear and finished with waiting. You look like you're going to war, Margaret said. Claire looked at her reflection for another moment. I am, she said. Good, Margaret said simply. Josie arrived at 4 with the final document packets, 1 folder per guest, 40 total, each containing Matthew's financial summary, the key wire transfer records, the forged mortgage documents, and the relevant excerpts from the Boston attorney's email chain, organized with tabs. Josie did not do anything without tabs. Remember, Josie said, do not lead. Let them go first. Eleanor will try to control the room. Ashley will try to display the ring. Give them the space to do both. Your power is not in what you say first. Your power is in what you say after they have already said too much. And if it starts to go wrong, it won't. Josie, Claire said. Josie squeezed her hand. If it starts to go wrong, you still have the sapphire. You still have Dorothy. You still have the truth. Those 3 things do not disappear. Matthew will be in the kitchen, Matthew said from the hallway, where he had been quietly reviewing his folder organization. I will come in through the side entrance when Josie signals. I will have the remaining copies. Claire nodded. At 6 o'clock, with 1 hour remaining before she needed to leave, Claire went to the nursery alone. She stood in the room she had painted herself, looked at the mobile above the empty crib, the stuffed animals arranged on the shelf, the tiny dresses in the closet. She had built this room the way she built every room, with attention and intention and the belief that spaces could hold the people inside them gently if you were careful enough in how you constructed them. She placed one hand on her stomach. I wanted to give you everything, she said quietly. I wanted to give you a family that was real. I am sorry it turned out to be this instead. Her daughter kicked, strong and certain. I know, Claire said. I know. She picked up the evening bag from the dresser. Confirmed the velvet box was inside. Confirmed her phone was charged. Confirmed that she looked, as Margaret had said, exactly like a woman going to war. Her own phone buzzed on the dresser. 1 text, unknown number. I will be there, whatever you need. Stephen. She picked up the bag, walked downstairs, opened the front door to the October evening. The Whitmore estate at 7 p.m. was exactly what 40 years of Eleanor's management had produced. Flawless, cold, expensive. Crystal chandeliers blazed across the entry hall and the formal dining room beyond. White linens, silver flatware, flowers arranged in the style of a magazine spread, a string quartet in the far corner, playing something European and unintrusive. 40 guests, in formal wear, performing ease for each other with the practiced fluency of people who had been doing it their entire lives. Eleanor stood by the fireplace in the main room, silver hair perfectly arranged, diamonds at her throat, because Eleanor always wore diamonds, because diamonds communicated a specific message about the permanence of certain things. She was receiving her guests with the warmth of a woman who had arranged everything exactly as she intended. Richard stood at her left shoulder, handsome, charming, his hand on a guest's arm at exactly the right moment. The laugh landing precisely where it needed to land, the performance of a man who had nothing to worry about. And across the room, entering through the main doors approximately 20 minutes after the stated start time, late enough to be noticed, not so late as to be rude, Ashley Morgan. The dress was red, fitted, carefully chosen for visibility. She entered the room the way she had practiced entering it. Claire was certain. Head up, posture open, the right hand slightly raised, the ring catching the chandelier light before she had taken 3 steps into the room. Her mother Diane followed behind her, touching the wainscoting with one exploratory finger and whispering to the nearest hired server about how absolutely gorgeous everything was. Diane Morgan was wearing a fascinator at a formal dinner in Hartford in October. Claire, from her position near the far end of the room, where Eleanor had suggested she stand while greeting guests, watched this entrance with the detached attention of someone who had been awake for 6 days and had arrived at a state of calm that existed on the other side of being afraid. Eleanor noticed Claire immediately, crossed the room with the smooth efficiency of a woman who had been managing spaces for 4 decades. Caroline, she said, with the particular warmth she reserved for people she was neutralizing. How lovely that you came. You look, she paused, wonderful. Thank you, Eleanor, Claire said. You have outdone yourself. The house is beautiful. They smiled at each other. It was the most honest exchange they had ever had. For the next hour, Claire moved through the dinner the way she had rehearsed. The correct questions to the correct people. The appropriate warmth at the appropriate moments. The visible contentment of a woman who had nothing on her mind except the evening in front of her. All while watching. Ashley worked the room with genuine talent. Every gesture oriented toward the ring. Every conversation angled so that her left hand was visible. The ring flash at the water glass. The ring flash at the appetizer. The ring flash at the air. When she laughed at someone's story and touched her own collarbone in that particular way. She was very good at it. But she had made a miscalculation that was entirely understandable, given what she knew about the evening's plan. She believed the audience was hers. She did not know she was performing for someone who had already changed the show. Dorothy Aldrich sat 2 seats to Claire's right at the dinner table, introduced by Margaret to the adjacent guests as an old friend from the Arts Council, a gemologist, fascinating woman. Dorothy had spent the cocktail hour in pleasant conversation about autumn in New England and the particular challenges of authenticating Victorian-era jewelry, and had given no indication whatsoever that she was the most dangerous person in the room. The first course arrived. Conversation moved through its familiar channels. Eleanor, at the head of the table, steered the room with the skill of someone who had been doing it for 4 decades. Claire watched the ring flash. She waited. The dessert plates were cleared. The room reached the particular relaxed warmth of a dinner that had been well executed and well attended. Wine glasses refilled. The string quartet shifted to something slightly livelier in the corner. Ashley set down her champagne flute. Claire felt the moment change. Ashley turned to Eleanor with a smile that she had clearly practiced until it felt natural. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, and her voice carried in the way she intended it to carry, across the immediate conversation and into the awareness of the nearest 8 guests. I have been meaning to say something all evening. Eleanor's answering smile was warm and prepared. Whatever for, sweetheart. For this, Ashley raised her left hand. The sapphire, the synthetic one, the $2,000 imitation of a $400,000 truth. Tseostum caught the chandelier light and spread it across the table. Family means everything to me. And knowing this has been in the Whitmore family for generations, knowing I am wearing something that connects me to all of that history, it means I am already home. She turned to Claire. Direct. Deliberate. The fake sympathy arranged across her face with considerable skill. I'm sure you understand, Claire. Some things are simply meant to be. 22 people looked at Claire Whitmore, waiting, some expecting tears, some expecting graceful withdrawal, none of them expecting her to reach into her evening bag. Claire set the velvet box on the table. She did not hurry. She did not perform. She simply opened the box, placed it where the candlelight could reach it, and let the Whitmore sapphire speak for itself. The room went quiet by degrees, and then all at once, and then completely, the sapphire sat in its Victorian setting and glowed with the particular depth of a stone that had been formed underground over a millennium and had survived every human being who had ever claimed to own it. Dorothy, Claire said. Her voice was level, clear. The voice of a woman who had been awake for 6 days and had arrived somewhere past fear on the other side. Dorothy Aldrich set down her dessert spoon, rose from her chair without haste, picked up the ring from Claire's outstretched hand. The silence in the room was absolute. Plates untouched, wine going flat, 40 people in formal wear, holding their breath without having decided to. Dorothy produced her loupe from her evening bag. She had come prepared. She had always been prepared. This was what 23 years of preparation looked like, and examined the stone under the chandelier. 30 seconds. This ring, Dorothy said finally, is the genuine Whitmore sapphire. Burmese, unheated, late Victorian setting. I appraised this stone 16 years ago for Stephen Whitmore. The provenance is not in question. She set it gently on the table, turned to Ashley. May I see yours? Ashley's hand moved back, instinctive. A woman protecting something she had not yet understood she was about to lose. That is, I do not think that is... Ashley started. Eleanor's voice came from the head of the table, controlled and smooth. This is hardly the appropriate moment for a jewelry examination. Claire has clearly been... Mother, Margaret, across the table. Quiet and steady. 30 years of silence converted into 3 syllables. Let Dorothy do her job. The room waited. No one moved toward the exits. No one looked at their phones. 40 people in black tie sitting absolutely still in the particular suspension of a moment that everyone present understood would be discussed for years. Ashley looked at Eleanor. Eleanor had no help to offer. The script had changed. The evening had gone somewhere she had not planned for, and she was, for the first time in longer than anyone at that table could remember, without a response prepared. Fine, Ashley said. Her voice shook at the edges. It is real. I know it is real. She gave it to me. She said it was the family ring. She said I was... She stopped, looked at the 40 people watching her, understood what she had just said. In front of all of them, Dorothy took Ashley's hand gently, examined the ring under the chandelier light, held it at the angle she needed. 10 seconds. 20. The string quartet had stopped entirely. This stone, Dorothy said, is synthetic corundum. Lab created. The color matching is excellent. Someone spent real money on a quality imitation. But there is no natural silk, no inclusions, no fingerprint of the earth. She set Ashley's hand down. This stone is worth approximately $2,000, perhaps somewhat less. The words landed the way the truth lands when it has been kept waiting for a long time. Not loud, not dramatic, simply real. The whispers began at the far end of the table and moved inward. Someone knocked a wine glass, and the red spread across the white linen. A woman near the center of the table put her hand over her mouth. "That is impossible," Ashley said. Her voice had lost its performance entirely, the careful modulation gone, something younger and more frightened underneath. "She gave it to me. She told me it was real. She told me I was—" She stopped again. Eleanor rose from her chair. Her composure was largely intact. It was remarkable, Claire thought, how much intact composure 40 years of practice could preserve. And she began the pivot that she had used her entire adult life, the warm, authoritative reframe, "this is a misunderstanding," delivered in the tone of someone who is above being questioned. Clearly there has been some confusion about the jewelry. "Richard, perhaps you can—" Richard can explain quite a bit. Josie Brennan's voice. From the far end of the table, where she had been sitting in pleasant obscurity for the past 2 hours, she stood. She had a folder in front of her. "While everyone is together," Josie said, in the particular voice she used in courtrooms to indicate that everyone was going to remain seated regardless of their preferences, "I have some documents that might provide some useful context." The side door opened. Matthew came in from the kitchen, carrying the remaining copies in a neat stack, and began distributing them along the table with the methodical efficiency of a man who had organized this moment precisely. Claire watched the guests open their folders, watched their faces change as they read. The bank statements, the wire transfers, the loan with the forged signature, the email chain with the Boston attorney, the strategy for postpartum instability, the plan to seek primary custody of a child not yet born. 40 people read in silence. Eleanor was still standing at the head of the table. For the first time in Claire's 6 years of knowing her, she was standing at the head of her own table with nothing to say. Richard came in from the hallway. He had apparently been somewhere in the back of the house for the past portion of the evening. Claire did not know exactly where, did not particularly care, and would later learn he had been on the phone with his Boston attorney in the library when the first round of folders was distributed. He stood in the doorway. His face was gray, in a way that had nothing to do with the lighting. The charm was simply gone, not faded, not strained, gone, and what was underneath it was cold and calculating and very afraid. "This is a setup," he said. His voice was controlled and flat. "You have been building this for a week. You manipulated my father. You are performing for these people, and you believe this will—" "Richard." Stephen Whitmore's voice. From his seat at the table, he stood up. In 40 years of Whitmore family dinners, Monsieur, Stephen Whitmore had never stood up to speak before his wife finished. 40 years of background, 40 years of retreating to his study, 40 years of not interfering. "Not tonight. Sign what Josephine has prepared," Stephen said. "Tonight. Or I place a call to the Bar Association Monday morning. Forged documents on a residential mortgage constitute felony fraud. I was a federal judge for 22 years. I know exactly what that charge carries, and I know exactly who to call." Richard looked at his father. Something passed between them, something that both of them understood would not repair. The particular fracture that happens when a child realizes the parent who stood back all their life has finally chosen a side and has not chosen them. Richard sat down. The guests began leaving. Quietly, quickly, the way people leave the scene of something they do not want attached to their reputation. Gathering coats and bags with the brisk efficiency of 40 people who had just read a document they were going to be discussing over Sunday brunch and needed to be elsewhere before anyone asked them to comment on the record. By the time the last car turned out of the circular drive, 7 people remained in the dining room. Claire, Josie, Matthew, Margaret, Stephen, Richard, and Eleanor, who had not moved from her position at the head of her table. She looked at Claire with an expression that had nothing left in it except something old and cold and stripped of performance. "You think you have won," she said. Her voice was quiet now, all the social warmth gone, the actual woman underneath it finally visible. "You have destroyed this family. Everything I built, everything Stephen's grandfather built before him. You have handed 40 years of work to people who will use it for gossip, and you believe that makes you righteous." Claire stood up. She had expected to feel triumphant in this moment. She did not. She felt tired. She felt sad in the specific way you feel sad when you have loved something that turned out to be made of something other than what you believed. She felt the weight of her daughter pressing downward and the weight of the past 6 days pressing equally hard from the other direction. And underneath all of that, she felt something else, something quiet and solid. She had come to understand something in the past 6 days about strength. She had believed for most of her adult life that strength was holding everything together, absorbing the damage, continuing to function, being the person who managed things so that other people did not have to. She understood now that this was not strength. This was service to people who did not deserve it. Strength was falling apart completely and then getting up anyway. Strength was sitting on a nursery floor at midnight and crying until there was nothing left, and then standing up because there was still something that needed doing. Strength was being here. She looked at Eleanor. "You did not build a family," she said. "You built a structure for controlling people. And I was never going to fit inside it, because I was never going to stop being a person long enough to be a component." She closed the velvet box on the table, placed it in her bag. "This is my daughter's inheritance," she said. "Not an Ashford thing, not a Whitmore thing, a June thing, when she is old enough to understand why." She looked at Josie. "Let's finish it." They moved to Stephen's study. It was a room Claire had been in twice in 6 years, once at Christmas, once when she and Richard had discussed the nursery renovation with a contractor Stephen had recommended, bookshelves floor to ceiling, a desk that had belonged to Richard's grandfather, the quiet of a room that had witnessed decades of private conversations. The documents were spread across the desk. Josie had them organized with the precision of someone who had spent 17 years preparing for exactly this kind of moment. Richard sat in the chair across from her. His attorney was still in Boston. He was, for possibly the first time in his adult life, entirely without representation and entirely without performance. He read. He read for a long time. His face cycled through the predictable sequence. Denial, calculation, the search for an exit, the realization that the exits had all been methodically closed. "You have taken everything," he said finally. "I have taken what was mine," Claire said, "and what you stole, and what our daughter is going to need." His eyes went to her stomach. Something moved through his expression. She chose not to analyze what it was. "And if I do not sign," he said. "Then I file the police report Monday morning," Stephen said from the corner. "Forgery, embezzlement, fraud. You will lose your license before the ink dries on the complaint." He paused. "I was a federal judge for 22 years, Richard. I know every person in that process personally." Richard looked at his father. There are moments that break things permanently. Not the large, dramatic ruptures, but the quiet ones. The moments when a child understands that the protection they believed they had was conditional on a set of behaviors they have now violated beyond recovery. Whatever remained between Stephen and Richard Whitmore after this night, it was not what had existed before. Richard signed, page after page, the divorce settlement. The custody arrangement, primary custody to Claire, supervised visitation to Richard in a public setting at scheduled intervals, the asset division, the recovery of the transferred funds, the trust established for their daughter, irrevocable, in an amount that accounted for every dollar that had been moved. When it was done, Josie gathered the documents and checked every signature and said, "It is finished." Richard said, as he was preparing to leave, "I never meant for any of this to hurt you." He said it the way people say things they have decided to believe because the alternative requires more honesty than they are currently capable of. Claire looked at him for what she understood was the last time she would look at him as her husband. "You never thought about me at all," she said. "That is worse than meaning it." She left first, walked through the estate she had attended dinners in for 6 years, past the art she had quietly rearranged on one visit because the spacing was wrong and Eleanor had never noticed, past the flower arrangements and the white linens and the crystal chandeliers still blazing over a room full of empty chairs, out through the front door, into the October night. The air was cold and smelled like leaves and rain and the end of something. Josie was beside her on the steps, then Margaret, then Stephen, standing in the doorway of his own house looking older than she had ever seen him. "Thank you," Claire said to him. He nodded. He did not say anything else. There was nothing else that was adequate, and he seemed to understand that. Margaret drove her home. They did not talk much. The evening had used up the available words. At one point, Margaret said, "You were extraordinary tonight." Claire looked out the window at the darkened suburbs passing. "I was terrified," she said. "I know," Margaret said. "That is the definition of extraordinary." 2 days later, at 4 o'clock in the morning, Claire woke up and understood that the timeline had moved. She called Josie. Josie called Matthew. By the time they reached the hospital, the sky was beginning to lighten at its edges in the particular tentative way of an early October dawn. 13 hours. It was hard, and it was fast, and there were moments in the middle of it when Claire was somewhere entirely past language, past the past 6 days, past everything except the single, immediate demand of what her body was doing. And then, at 5:17 in the afternoon, her daughter was placed in her arms. Dark hair, eyes that had not decided their color yet, fingers that gripped with the conviction of someone who had already determined that holding on was the correct strategy. "Hello," Claire said. Her voice came out different than she expected. Softer, lower. The voice of someone meeting the person they have been waiting for. "I have been waiting for you," she said, "for a very long time." Her daughter looked at her face with the concentrated intensity of a person encountering something entirely new and deciding, after a moment of careful assessment, to stay. Claire named her June, after nothing specific, after the month that always felt like the beginning of something, the month when the year finally commits to itself. Matthew had brought terrible hospital coffee. Margaret sat in the corridor for 11 hours without complaint. Stephen arrived at dawn with a box of pastries from a bakery he had driven out of his way to reach. He sat in the waiting room, and he did not open the book he had brought, and when the nurse came out to tell him the news, he cried in the quiet way of a man who had been storing things up for a long time. Josie held Claire's hand during the parts that required it, and did not say anything that needed to be said. The months that followed were not easy. Let us be honest about this, because the honest version is more useful than the version where everything resolves cleanly the moment the papers are signed. There were weeks when the design firm was so slow that Claire ran the numbers 3 times looking for something she had miscalculated. There were nights when June would not sleep, and Claire stood in the sage green nursery at 2 in the morning, holding her daughter and feeling the particular exhaustion of a person doing everything alone that was previously done in partnership. Even a false partnership. There were moments when she drove past a restaurant she and Richard had liked and felt something that was not grief exactly, but lived in the same neighborhood. She let herself feel all of it. She did not let any of it stop her. The design firm did not stay slow. Word traveled, in the particular way that word travels through certain social networks, about the woman who had sat at Eleanor Whitmore's dinner table and kept her composure under conditions that would have undone most people. Claire received 3 referrals from guests who had been present that Saturday, then 4 more. Then a call from a boutique hotel developer in the Arts District who said he had heard she was exactly the kind of person he wanted on a major renovation project. She took the commission. Eleanor's social standing did not survive the dinner party. 40 people had read those documents. 40 people had watched the Ring authentication. 40 people had a story that was considerably more interesting than whatever revised version Eleanor offered from Scottsdale. The Whitmore Foundation Board asked her to step back pending a review of grant allocation practices. She resigned before the review began. She moved south and began rebuilding, and the people who knew her well understood that she would probably succeed because Eleanor Whitmore had never in her life stayed dismantled. But the 40 people who had been in that room would not be the audience for the new version. Richard surrendered his law license pending the forgery investigation. He avoided criminal charges through complete financial restitution and a civil settlement that satisfied the bar's requirements. He lived in a rental apartment and came to his supervised visitation appointments with the inconsistency of a man who had not yet decided what kind of father he intended to be. Claire did not decide for him. She held the space for June. What Richard did with it was his. Ashley Morgan called once, 4 months after the dinner. She did not ask for anything. She said only, "I believed him. I know that does not fix what I was part of. I needed you to know that I did not know the whole truth." Claire listened to all of it. She did not forgive immediately, but she acknowledged. 2 women who had been handed the same lies in a different order. That was not friendship, but it was something true. The Whitmore sapphire sat on the shelf in Claire's office in its velvet box. Not on her finger. She was not ready for that. But present, visible. A reminder every time she looked at it of what truth costs and what it is worth. Josie's legal pad. Destroy them in teacher handwriting across the top, was framed between 2 design awards on the opposite wall. 3 clients had asked whether it was for sale. The answer was no. Some things are not for sale. 1 year later, a Tuesday afternoon in October. 1 year, almost to the day, June was in her bouncer on the office floor conducting a methodical and apparently deeply satisfying investigation of a board book about farm animals. She had recently become mobile in the particular lurching way of a person who has not yet fully committed to upright locomotion, but has strong opinions about where she wants to be. Claire was at her desk reviewing specifications for a residential project when Josie called. "Did you see?" Josie said. "What?" "The foundation. 7 former scholarship recipients. Civil suit filed this morning, alleging misappropriation of grant funds over 11 years. Claire was quiet for a moment. "The playbook," she said. It went further than we knew. It always does, Josie said. With people like that, it always goes further than anyone knew. Claire put the phone